Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future Focused Learning podcast, where we explore the intersection of technology and education and strive to answer the big question: how do we prepare students for the future? I'm your host, Kyla Bolden, founder and CEO of WizKid Learning. Each episode, we bring you insightful conversations with educators, industry leaders, and change makers who are transforming learning environments and equipping students with the skills they need to thrive in an ever-evolving world. So for this episode, we have Antonio Pacifico joining us. I was really excited for this conversation as Antonio is someone who has had extensive experience with a variety of roles in the education system. From starting with Teach for America, then to becoming a full-time teacher, and then advancing to principal, and now serving as associate partner of school design at the Opportunity Trust, Antonio's journey has been truly inspiring, and he's one of the few people that has just seen the U.S. education system from so many different perspectives. So his insights are very valuable and interesting. And one of the cool things about Antonio is, yes, he has many innovative ideas and strategies on how schools could improve, but he also has a track record of showing that these ideas that he has works. I mean, before joining the Opportunity Trust, the school that he led in New Orleans was one of the lowest performing schools in Louisiana for about 30 years. And by the end of his time leading that school, the school was in the top third of schools in all of Orleans Parish. So he is somebody who has a lot of terrific ideas and has a proven track record that, hey, when you step out and make changes, these ideas end up working. So I really enjoyed speaking with Antonio. I feel like you guys are going to enjoy this episode too. We talked about many different aspects of the education system, and we also delved into the importance of increasing numeracy and math scores, exploring how these skills are key to preparing students for a tech-focused future. Thanks, guys, so much for listening, and here's the episode. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, Antonio. When I first started thinking about launching the Future Focused Learning podcast for WizKid, you were one of the first people that I thought about because we're always looking to have individuals like you that have had a lot of experience across the education sector in many different perspectives. So I know you used to be a principal and now you work more on the nonprofit side of education, working at the Opportunity Trust. And I always like to ask, was education something that you always wanted to go into, or was this something that you kind of fell into?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I definitely feel honored to be here. Um, and education was not part of my path. I, like many people who got into teaching and got into teaching through Teach for America many years ago, I was I always wanted to be an attorney, like from the time I was five. Uh, and I my family didn't know any attorneys. We didn't grow up with tons of money, and I met one. Uh, at a gym when I was like a sophomore in college. And he was like, well, if you want to go to law school, something that will be good for you is if you can show that you've done some community focused work. And literally, I think this was like the summer going into my junior year of college. My first semester as a junior, Teach for America showed up in one of my classes, presented, and I was like, this will be a great thing for me. And it can show some community focused work before I go to law school, and I can do my 2 years and go to law school. And ultimately I flew down to New Orleans. I met 60 incredible young fifth graders that I fell in love with, and here I am many years later still in education.
Oh, wow. You know what's interesting? I did not know that you did Teach for America. Incredible. So my next question was going to be a little bit about your childhood and if anything from your childhood inspired you to go into education. But I want to talk a little bit about your time at Teach for America. So how was it like entering the classroom at first, not knowing if this was going to be something that you're going to do for years to come? Did you expect the first year that I was going to stay in this, or was it something that you just, kept on going at?
So one of the things about me, and I think one of the things that allowed me to grow as a teacher pretty quickly, is I'm incredibly competitive with myself.
Mhm.
And so when I started teaching, And it was, this was a very different time than it is today. It was a like very competitive environment. It was a very like be great or you're failing kids. And of course, like that, we got to have more grace for people. There's got to be a longer runway to people being great. Um, but I just like became dedicated to it so fast. I like loved my children so much um, that I really felt a ton of responsibility for doing well. And so I was acutely aware when I wasn't doing well. And that was essentially like the entirety of my first year. Um, but I was just like, this is my whole life. The only thing I did in my first year was teaching. My wife at the time was working on a cruise ship in Hawaii. And so I was like, and one of the things that was incredible and what I'm so fortunate about, my first principal just invested so much into me. So I like took every opportunity to be developed. Like we held free PD sessions on Tuesday on top of our PD sessions on Friday, and I went to every single one of them. I did everything that I could to grow and get better.
Yeah, that's really important. I feel when new teachers or just even new educators are entering the school space, it's super important for them to learn from those who are there now, but then also so that they can learn the new things that they want to bring into the classroom. Because we all know how education definitely needs to change. And in order to bring so many innovative solutions, it's important for us to, really be educated on how to best prepare our students. And so you were teaching third grade. Did you say third grade at
I
first?
was teaching fifth grade.
Fifth grade, fifth grade. Okay. So you're a fifth grade teacher. And then now I know that before the position that you're in now, you actually became a principal. So, and you were a principal for several years. So tell me a little bit more about that journey from fifth grade teacher to becoming a principal. And then when did that switch turn on that you were like, okay, this is something that I don't want to just do for a couple of years. I want to do this as a career.
I think it like really happened almost right away. Like I was having so much fun being with my kids that I knew like, and for a long, long time, I never thought that I would want to work with children. Not that I was like, anti-kid. I was just like, I just didn't think that that would be my pathway because I thought I was going to be an attorney. And I just like loved it so much. And I love the magic that happens when children learn something. It's like it truly is magical. Watching a kid read for the first time, do math for the first time, learn a new concept, explore something new. Like it's truly magical watching a student walk in and not know something and walk out and know something different. And that's really amazing. My like ascent, I suppose, to the principalship was, I think, when I look backwards, it looks like it was a straight line, but in the middle of it, it felt like it was just so chaotic. Um, I grew to become a pretty good teacher. I had really substantive results my second and third year. Um, I was the teacher of the year in my school. The third year, I had the highest outcomes on the most difficult assessment in New Orleans that year. Like we had done a meta analysis of all of the students across Louisiana and the lowest performing test or the test that students performed the lowest on was the fifth grade ELA test. And I had the best results on our fifth grade ELA test. I had like a 99 VAM score that year where they compare teachers who were teaching like students across and then, scale them 0 to 100. So it was just like, it was such an amazing year. And I really loved working with kids. And I thought like, I want to take the next step. Like moving up to me is really important. And so I became an AP and I thought, I'm going to do this for a long time. Like I love my principal. I love working here. And, I think I even told my principal, like, as long as you're in this seat, I'm going to be in this seat. And I'm so happy for that. And I want that to continue. And of course, like, in March of that year, he gets an incredible opportunity. He's leaving the school. And, it was like a real struggle for me. I'm like, I don't think I'm ready to be a principal yet. Um, but it was also, again, it was just like a strange time. So then I became the principal of my school in New Orleans. That was like late in the year, learned a ton, trial by fire, and then, ultimately left New Orleans and came to Denver, where I got connected with a high performing charter network here through one of my coaches who was national at the time. And then I was, in the principal seat for 5 more years and I loved it. It was great. But it's also so hard and so demanding.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can imagine any job where you're showing up and you're responsible for 400 plus people every day, if you put 400 people inside a building, someone's going to do something they ought not to every single day.
Hmm.
And when you're a principal, that all ends with you. And so it's just a lot to really be excellent and to really drive excellence. And because I had sacrificed so much for so long, being in that seat, like it was time to pursue something different that could
Yeah.
give me some more balance while still having impact.
One of the challenging things that I would think about being a principal is, and I also find this just running an education company or any organization that works with students, is you are managing the people that teach the students and the people that create the programming, but then you're also managing the students as well too. And those are
Mhm.
two, and then you're also in a way managing the parents, right? And so you have three stakeholders there, all equally as important, that have very different objectives. The kids just want to have fun in a lot of ways. And then the teachers are trying to do the best they can with the resource that they have. And then, of course, the parents want to understand more about what their students are learning, have an active role in the students' education. And also many of them probably have opposing views from each other as well, too. So it's a lot to keep a lot of people happy, while also, I even forgetting this, making sure that you adhere to everything that the school board and school district needs you to do, etc. So I can imagine that was a lot of responsibility, and but also gave you the opportunity to really learn about education from many different angles.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, for me, one of the things I like learned very early on in leadership was like the pursuit of happiness is futile. And so I didn't spend a lot of time trying to keep my constituents happy. What I spent a lot of time doing is being transparent and inviting people into the process, um, and really trying to create conditions where it wasn't like me making unilateral decisions by myself. Um, because I have the perspective as the school leader, and that's only one perspective. And so, one of the things I did very early on was build a robust teacher leadership. Everywhere I've been, I've been really, or I've tried to be very thoughtful about building up middle level leaders because I think they're fundamental to school success, and then trying to invite parents in consistently, so that we can hear from them, so that we can, share what we're doing and learn from our parents. Um, but I don't think it was ever in an effort to keep people happy, because I just, I've never been successful at that. But I do think where I have had success is that people always know where I stand.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so much to manage.
I can imagine. I like that how you said like happiness wasn't the focus, because I know when you are working with so many different types of groups of people, you cannot make everyone happy. It's not possible. And ultimately, I always like to think that happiness is just a choice like that you cannot make on behalf of somebody else. They have to make it,
Yeah.
right? But what you said about inviting them into the conversation and giving them leadership opportunities, giving them agency a bit over what's happening in that school environment, I think that's incredibly important. And I think it's something that's not done in education enough. Now, one of the things that we do at WizKid Learning is we try to make sure students have agency over what they're learning. And of course, there's parameters within the subject, but being able to even have a child decide between doing one type of project or another type of project, little things like that really make somebody feel like they're in control of their education, which ultimately
Mm.
makes them even more invested. And I feel like the same could go for teachers as well too. Giving them opportunities to shape the school makes them feel like they're a bit more in control of their day to day, because their work is their life too, as well as the environment that they are creating, and probably ended up making them feel like they have more ownership and responsibility to make the school environment a good place to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my teacher leaders were such key decision makers. We had two different like kind of tracks. We had grade level chairs and then instructional leaders. And I always told them like the grade level chair position is in preparation for the principal role, and the instructional leader position is in preparation for the assistant principal role. Um, because like I truly empowered my grade level chairs to solve 99% of the problems that they faced and to take accountability for what happened in their grade level. And, there's tons of work that goes into actually setting that up to be a reality. It means like when tough decisions come down, you have to empower people to make them, because you'll never be prepared to make the big decisions as a principal if you've never made them before.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there were many a times where I was like, I really want to step in here and do this. But again, like in service of building other people, you have to let people make choices and sometimes let them make mistakes and let them learn from them and be there along the way, as a support and somebody to empower them. And I think, sometimes I got that right, and a lot of times I got
Mhm. But it's all about the learning process, which is good. I want to switch gears a little bit because I know you spend a lot of time in the principal role, and so as well as in the teacher role. And now you are at the Opportunity Trust, and you have the opportunities to work with a lot of different types of schools from all across the board. And I feel like you are one of the unique people that have a lot of different perspectives of being on all sides of the education space. And I wanted to see and learn a little bit more about how your diverse experience has shaped your perspective on the current state of education in the US.
what a good question. Um, I feel like my experience prior to getting to the trust, like all of my schools had the same end goal, students going to college. And there were different like mediums by which that happened. My school in New Orleans was much more, creative. It was an arts integrated school. Um, and so we did a lot of work with leveraging the arts as a methodology to enhance learning and to integrate learning. And we also, in New Orleans, culture is so rich. So we had like a really robust band and a really robust dance team. Um, and it was so clear that those things were so important to our kids and our families. When I when I transitioned and came to Denver, it was a much more systematic approach to student learning. Like one of the things that we were really proud of is we would say like, what we try to do is eliminate the situation where it's like, well, if I was in Kyla's class, I got to learn this year, but if I was in Antonio's class, I didn't. We really believed like all of our classes were run the same because all of our children deserve a high quality experience. And so you could literally go to my teammate school and see kindergarten math and go to my school and see kindergarten math, you'd see the same lesson. And when I got into the role at the trust, I got to see like lots of different outcomes that people were pursuing. So I have, a place-based learning school in my portfolio. I have a career and post-secondary focused school in my portfolio. I saw a comp sci school in New York. I have a media school in my portfolio, a leadership school in my portfolio. So I've gotten to see a lot of different models and a lot of different um, missions, which has like really opened my eyes. I felt like one of the things that I brought that was helpful to my school in Denver was like we didn't win on just having a really tight culture. Like where we were really successful was we built up a lot of content and knowledge from our teachers. And we did that through a lot of different experiences. And so I felt like I brought that and I was like, oh, this is, these are the two strands of the rope. We're going to put these things together, create an incredible education experience. But there is so much more than that. And because our future is evolving so quickly, our schools have like honestly are not doing a good enough job of catching up towards the future that our children are going to go into. And so it's I think it's one of the many challenges our leaders and our systems level leaders are facing right now is it was hard enough to rebound from the pandemic. And I think many schools and systems are still trying to do so. And on top of that, the future is changing so quickly that it's like we're not coming back to a baseline pre-pandemic yet, and yet our future is so dramatically different. It just makes the work that we're doing like we can't just go back to what we were doing in 2019. Like we need to be thinking about what we ought to be doing in 2030. And that's so hard to do when you're sitting in the middle of the weeds of students who have big needs and, families that really want great things for their kids and teachers who are trying to create more balance. Like it's just it's a unique, interesting environment that I do think is ripe for innovation, but I'm not sure if we're innovating at the rate we need to catch up to the future that's existing.
That's a really good point. And I think just because we've gone through so many changes in the last 4 years between, and it's not just the pandemic. Like, yes, the pandemic was a really big change, but what we saw was because everyone was at home, technology had to evolve even quicker in order to keep up with the ability for us to live some type of normal life. And with how quickly technology started to move, and it was moving very quickly before, the world has changed a lot. Like this is not the same education system, the same world, the same kids that we were dealing with just 5 years ago. So much has changed. And something that the education system has just always been, as it's always been very behind from what the career and like what the market needs right now, right? In being able to prepare students for that. So I love the fact that you're getting to work with so many schools that seem to have a non-traditional approach or just not a singular focus when it comes to preparing students for the future. Because when I think about it, yeah, most schools, you would think the main thing is just like, get them to college, right? And I think that works in a lot of places, but it typically only is super successful in areas where you're not dealing with some of the other problems that you might be facing across most of the school systems, right? So if the math rates are up in the school, literacy is fine, the school has, a good health on finances, et cetera, and it's in like a middle income, upper income neighborhood, yeah, sure. Our main focus could be let's get the kids to college. But when you're dealing with a lot of other problems that, most Americans are facing, that, and then you add in budget cuts, teacher turnover, et cetera, the goal can't singularly be let's get students to college and also how expensive college is as well too. There's so many things that go into it. So it's cool that you're getting to work with schools that might take a non-traditional approach to what is end game for the students. And one of the things that you said is tech is moving so quickly, and we don't know if schools are evolving at the rate that they need to evolve at. Can you speak to some of the challenges that you're finding schools are having with just keeping up with what students need to learn versus, the resources that they have in at hand?
Yeah. I think to like maybe put a fine point on what I'm thinking about. So I'd go to like what do I think is going to exist in the marketplace first? And like a truth today is that we import engineers at a significant rate outside of the United States. And it's, a function of that is because we are not teaching math well in this country. And we weren't doing that pre-pandemic, let alone after the pandemic. And I would say like math is kind of the subject that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. But I think as we were going into it, and this was true like as a school leader, what I was most worried about was literacy and teaching children to read over the computer. And I think, and what we have seen sort of nationally, and I'm sure there are outliers on every end, is that largely we have rebounded in terms of literacy rates. And, a function of that is we actually do know how to teach children to read. I know that, I'm not going to I don't want to go too far in depth into like all of the reading wars that exist out there. But what I would say is like, in my humble opinion, the research is settled. And if you just systematically teach children to read starting in kindergarten, they will be readers at second grade.
Yeah. And I
And
would
I think,
say, just to touch on that, like the literacy problem is not just like we don't know how to teach kids to read, as you said. We know this. It's due to so many other things, like not having enough teachers, like all of
yeah,
these things are contributing to that more so than our ability to teach kids how to read.
exactly. And there's also like, yeah, there's lots of reasons why children do and don't
Yeah.
learn to read, but a function of it is not because we don't know how. We
Mhm.
actually we do know how. What came into focus in, school year 21-22 and kind of beyond was like, oh no, our students are losing ground in math and we actually don't know how to catch a fourth grader up who didn't learn base 10 in first grade. And I think that there are lots of organizations out there that claim that they do know that. But what I would point to is like, but the results don't back that up. What we actually see is math results are not rebounding from post-pandemic and or from pre-pandemic. And what was true before the pandemic was we were still importing engineers at an alarming rate. And so math is a real concern right now. At least for me, it's something that I'm incredibly concerned about. Many of my colleagues who I talk to around the country are concerned about, because as I look at what is the future, as AI has been introduced and as people are spending more time on their computers, we work in hybrid environments today, which was not true, many years ago when I got into the teaching profession. It has created an exponential growth in tech. And so if you're thinking about like where jobs are going to be in the future, there's going to be a need for computer engineers. There's going to be a need for software engineers. And while AI will automate a lot of things like potentially code, and I have friends that work in the tech industry right now, and their software engineers are a little worried because they have some AI programming that can write hundreds of lines of code in seconds. Stuff that would take them days to put together. There still will always be a need for people to be on the back end of things to be correcting, revising, and improving the AI and the machine learning that's going on. And so like if you assume a more tech dominated world where, many people who worked tangentially to technology are going to need to work more inside of it, there's just such a need for people to have a better math understanding beyond just the point of like, and I think we've talked about this too, like code is really helpful because it teaches you a structured way to think about problem solving. And that's also going to be a core responsibility or a core skill that people are going to be looking for in the next generation of careers. It will be like unique, adaptive, and analytical problem solving skills. And when we're not teaching math well, it's concerning that we're not going to be developing those skills for our kids.
Yeah, math teaches you how to think. I always say that, and you need it for so many other reasons, but the student that is good at math typically can write a pretty good essay too. And it's because how a lot of things work in this world, it's just an algorithm, it's just a formula, being able to think through things, problem solve things, reason, show why you got to this answer. That is a lot of what we do in our work and then also just in life in general. So math is so important for so many reasons. And I loved how you touched on how it relates to careers like engineering and software development, because math is the starting point, right? So the students that are good at math or have an affinity of math or just, enjoy math class tend to be the ones that are like, let's go into computer science, let's go into engineering, etc. And if we're not getting them at a young age to be at the right level when it comes to math, they're not going to go and take an intro to computer science class when they get to college. It's just the student that didn't enjoy math or was falling behind in math also oftentimes aren't even eligible actually to go into those
Yeah.
streams. And that's very scary that we could be counting a lot of students out from a very young age just because of, not because of them, our inability to make sure that they are at the level that they need to be at when it comes to math. What do you think is solutions to this problem? I'm sure there's many.
Yeah. Well, for me, based on my experience, I think that I think what actually makes this problem worse is that we look for a solution that's very technical. Well, if you just implement this curriculum, well, if you just do this strategy, what I would hold is like, okay, maybe that's true. I accept that. And what I know from lots of research is that our expectations of children influence their outcomes at a huge rate. NPR did a study back in like 2011. And, essentially it held that like teachers who expected children to succeed in no shocking turn of events did succeed. And I think one of the unfortunate curses that we are handing down generation to generation, and this was true for me, so I will speak from my own personal experience. It wasn't until I was in my mid 20s that I thought that I could learn, right? Like I was told from a young age, like, oh, well, you're just not a math person. And it's like, if you actually dissect that and you actually like think about what people are saying to you, the implication is that people are born oriented towards math or not. And like my personal belief is that's fundamentally untrue, and that people are capable of learning anything. Um, it's just I unfortunately, that mindset of I'm not a math person impacted me negatively. And I wasn't on a pathway towards engineering or computer science in a way in which I probably could have been.
Mm-hmm.
If that message would have been different. So for me, like solution number one is like start attacking people's mindsets around what they believe students are capable of. And I think that this is like most fundamentally true in the elementary school space. It's why I like dedicated so much of my career in elementary school is that, and I want to be clear here. I don't blame teachers or administrators or anything because we're under like just such challenging circumstances, and we're tasked with doing so much with so little, and so much in so little time. And I would say it is so easy to look at 5-year-old children and be like, oh, they're just so cute.
Yeah.
And they just need to play, and they just need this, and they just need that. And what they also need is to learn how to count. And they also need to learn base 10. And they also need to learn the inverse relationship between addition and subtraction. And, like we have to develop that mindset in our teachers that these things are so critically important from young ages. And that, our kids don't have this immense amount of time to get it right. And I think part of what, to go back to us and like part of what we're handing down is many of us just like, we're not on a math trajectory. And like, we end up in these, we end up maybe as a teacher and it's like ultimately fine, but it's actually not fine. And it's definitely not fine for our kids. And this is where, my wife and I are getting ready to have a baby this year. And when our child starts kindergarten, like, in my own school, I was never okay with, oh, well, the kids are just young, so they're not going to get this. And that's definitely not happening for my kid either. And, like part of what we were touching on earlier, like you were talking about, like, college isn't the only success path, which I so agree with. But what I get worried about in that conversation is I don't think it's nuanced enough, because it's also like, well, whose kids are we talking about when we say college isn't for everyone? Because, I don't think we're talking about like Mark Zuckerberg's kids or Elon Musk's kids, right? Like if they want to go, they're going to go. And so I have trades in my family. My brother-in-law is an electrician. And so, I think that all of those career opportunities are great. And it's like, and kids should have those opportunities, and we shouldn't just be teaching them how to be a plumber. We should be teaching them how to run their own plumbing business.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, like, I think it all starts with mindset, and then it's about skill development. And I think we often miss the mindset part. We try to develop skills, but we're walking around holding the same beliefs that, well, this kid isn't going to be on the pathway to AP calculus. And it's like, well, they could be though.
Yeah. It's so crazy to count a student out from so young. And I have so many thoughts about what you said because you said a few different things. First, I want to touch on, the conversation about, okay, everyone doesn't need to go to college, but who does that actually mean? And so it reminds me of a story. So at WizKid Learning, we obviously focus on teaching students these technical skills. So coding, cybersecurity, AI, the list goes on and on. And I remember having a conversation with somebody. He was quite wealthy from Silicon Valley, and he was saying that, you know what, like we don't need to teach kids how to code. They don't really even need to go into it in university. My daughter, she learned how to code after university. Now she works at a big tech firm, and she was able to be very successful. And we got into the conversation about like the nuances of, when you come from maybe a neighborhood where the schools are very highly funded, and not only that, the parents are very connected, then yeah, maybe you could wait till after university to study something like coding and not be behind, right? But for most individuals, it's super important to get students on the track to have the most opportunity in the future. And I think that's what making sure that they understand math at the level that they need to understand it at, learn about emerging technologies, all of those things from a young age, you are just opening up somebody's ability to have more opportunities. And I like what you said about, okay, maybe we could teach students how to be plumbers, but also then own a business when it comes to plumbing. And that's what higher education does, giving them the opportunities to work for somebody or own their own business. But when we're just putting them in this track from such a young age, like, oh, Jimmy's having problems with math in grade 2, let's put him in classes that move him towards trade schools. Jimmy didn't have a chance to become an architect, right? Or something else just because he might have not understood math at the rate that he should have done when he was 7 years old. That's so unfair. And I think that's one of the core things about just the education system in general that really gets me upset, because students can actually learn a lot of concepts in math before they learn how to read. So at WizKid, we have like kindergarten tech classes that we create the curriculum for, and we teach the teachers how to implement it. And the kids are learning about like algorithms through dance games, and they're learning about multiplication through symbols and all of these cool things. And they're 4 years old. Students at a very young age can learn these concepts, but it is a lot about changing the mindset, because I was like you. I was told in high school that, I was having trouble with math. I skipped a grade, and it felt like I just wasn't a math person. So I went on and I studied English in university, and I had learned how to code when I was a kid and etc. But just from having that one experience in math class, that I was like, calculus, it's really hard, made me feel like this wasn't something that I had the ability to do for the rest of my life, which is insane. And so many students have that experience from such a young age. But then I think about, if I was to then go become a teacher and I haven't like had the mindset shift that I have now, I'm still thinking math is hard. So then I'm telling the students math is hard, and everyone's having a hard time in math, mostly because of the mindset towards the fact that math is hard. So I think a mindset shift is absolutely one of the biggest things that is needed.
And like it's so, when I hear the stories of like, the student that you were giving an example of, like Jimmy in second grade who struggled with math, and so, let's put him on a trade pathway. That's terrifying, and it's like it's terrifying for me, like it's terrifying to me to do that to a child who's 14 or 15 or 16. Like if we would have taken me and been like, okay, well, your pathway is becoming a lawyer, I would never be where I'm at today. I wouldn't be here with you.
Mhm.
And a big part of my like growth, my learning happened in college and then after college. And so, to pigeonhole children is just that's what I find so scary. And then, on top of that, and you were talking about this as well, like there's such an opportunity gap in this country. And it's true along the lines of race, and it's even and for what I understand most acutely is the difference in socioeconomic status. I had a friend who was, that I met teaching, who grew up wealthy and knew he was going to be an attorney from very early on. And the things that he had done throughout high school and college to set him up to go to Stanford Law School and now work at one of the most prolific law schools in the country, I had no idea that that's what I needed to do in order to be on that pathway. And a big part of that was what he was exposed to and what he had opportunities to learn at an early age. So for me, I'm all for children getting lots of different opportunities The only thing that I caution against is like that works when the mindset isn't, well, this kid is going to this trade school.
Hmm.
It works when it is like all children. I believe that all children can access all pathways and that with the right resources, instruction, and support around them, that they're capable of anything. If you believe that, then it's not dangerous.
Hmm.
But if you hold a belief anywhere in you, and of course I have had this belief myself. So speaking for me in particular, when I had those beliefs, it limited children.
Hmm.
And that's not cool. Because no one sends their child off to school saying like, hey, I know my kids got big dreams, but why don't you actually reinforce what you think they should be?
Hmm.
And it's like it's why the teaching profession has such a massive impact on our youth, and why investing in and developing our teachers is such a critical aspect of improving our future, improving our children, giving our children access to 100% of their potential.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into my next question because the big question that we like to ask on this podcast is really how can we prepare students for the future? We know how quickly everything is moving and it's technology, but it's also every single aspect of the world seems to be changing really quickly. Even when it comes to our education system, so many things have changed even in the last 4 or 5 years. And it's kind of daunting when we're thinking about, okay, how do schools need to evolve? Because at the end of the day, the way that we teach, the way school boards and school districts have been structured, they've been structured this way for years and years and years and years. And, the thought of uprooting the entire system and changing it and et cetera, is very yes, it needs to happen, but it's very idealistic too, right? A lot of things, it will take a very, very long time for even the way we go about schooling to catch up to what it needs to be. But how do you think the education system needs to better evolve to prepare students for the rapidly changing world that they're entering into, and more specifically, that world that is so driven by technology, especially taking into account AI, how that's going to take away so many jobs. It already has. It's been doing that for years, and also add new jobs. So, what's your thoughts on the way that the education system needs to evolve?
I think that one of the things that I think is ought to be true is like I think that we do need a revamping of what we think kids deserve by the time they hit 18. So, we had in 2010, somewhere around there, 9, 10, Common Core was rolled out. And, regardless of whatever state you live in, and, I know that people have their own thoughts and opinions about Common Core, but largely what that did was it increased the level of expectation for all students, which I think is a net positive, that we have higher expectations for our children. But I think we need to get even more clear, given the rapidly changing environment, about what we want to be true for our children when they turn 18. What are the skills, abilities, and knowledge that they should have by the time that they get there? Because again, and I think like you're saying, our education system was built 100 years ago and it hasn't really changed. And it's still the same system largely. If you walked into a classroom in 1950 and you walked into a classroom today, they would not look demonstrably different. There would be children sitting in seats. There would largely be students working with pencils and papers, etc. And yet, look at us, right? Our work is happening through a computer with wireless headphones and everything else. So I would say one, like we need to do a better job of defining what that is going to be, and then two, and again, I think this is nuanced and cautionary. What we have to be careful of is like we don't want to design a system that's built for a future tomorrow, because again, because our future is changing at an exponential rate every single second, we'll end up building a system that becomes obsolete so fast.
Mhm.
And so, and I think that's so hard for people. And especially it's hard for us as educators, because as educators, what we like is a backwards design. We want to get to X goal. We'll create a roadmap to get to X goal. We'll monitor along the way and we will get to X goal. But what's true is that X goal is actually changing at a rapid rate over the course of a year, a day, a month, an hour. Um, like even my school right now, that's a media focused school, like it's teaching children how to podcast, but is that going to be their reality? They're in first grade. So in 12 years from now, are they going to be doing podcasts? Or what is it going to look like? Is it going to be holographic stuff? I
Holograms.
don't, yeah,
I'm thinking
yeah,
the
I
same
don't,
thing.
yeah,
Like
I
in
don't,
the VR glasses, I like who knows?
right. I have no idea. Um, and so like if I were to set up, if I was thinking about like what needs to be true is that children need options available to them. Like you should not get to, and I think this is maybe an old idea. You shouldn't get to the point where you're 18 and you don't have choice. And to enable choice, kids need lots of different skills. It means that you have to be proficient in math. It means that you have to be a proficient reader. And then, I think what we don't have right now that I think we need to have is a real focus on developing students' ability to present and to uh, make sense of what is complicated.
Mhm.
Um, Being able to distill what is very rigorous and challenging into simple form. Because what will also be true, I think, in this changing world is that there's actually going to be a high demand too for liberal arts students who are good at looking at these complex problems or this complex software and being able to talk person to person. Because I don't think that's going away, right? Like being able to articulate your value add and being able to do it in layman's terms is super important. And it's one of the challenges many tech companies are facing today is that, they've built these teams that are full of technical people, but someone ultimately has to talk to the customer.
Mhm.
And that's not always the strength or hasn't been fully developed for the people who are working, who are accustomed to working behind their computer, encoding by themselves, et cetera. And so, and then I think I touched on this with like the plumber example, like, and children need to learn how to be an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
Like what does it take to set up a business? What are like, okay, you want to be a mechanic. How do we go from mechanic to shop owner? Or, you want to be an electrician. Great. How do we go from journeyman to master electrician to company owner? Because, and for me, that's what I want to be true for my kid. I don't want my kid and like this, it also harkens back to like the 100 years ago where it's like, oh, well, I'm just going to be a farmer. And it's like, okay, but what is it going to take to add to your farm? What's it going to take to increase that business? And I think because our demands are so high and because we haven't done such a good job of equipping students both in literacy and in math, because the average adult reads at like a sixth grade level. Which is also alarming and scary. And the majority of adults, like 9 out of 10, will never walk into a bookstore again or read a book cover to cover again after high school.
Mhm.
Also terrifying. But I think because we've had such challenges with teaching literacy and math, these other things that are going to be mission critical for our future, like those are also lagging.
You touched on the idea of making sure everyone has some type of entrepreneurship type education. I think that's really important because even thinking about the raising cost of living, the decrease in so many different types of jobs, most people, even people that maybe 20 years ago, one parent could have afforded to support, a family of four, that is not the same anymore, right? So I love what you said about giving them opportunities and options because at the end of the day, no longer are you going to graduate university and work in the same career or the same job for 40 years, for 20 years, even maybe 10 years. You are going to need to be adaptable and going to have to be able to learn new skills and new types of jobs in order to, I don't want to even just say be successful. Yes, that's the goal, but in order to survive in a lot of ways, which is quite scary because I don't think we're doing a good job when it comes to that at all, just preparing for the reality of what we're walking into.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think this is like our problem, and like it's also like it's the challenge that our teachers are facing is that we're not having a national conversation about how to support our educators in order to deliver on this. And
Mhm.
so, what I never want to get misconstrued in the conversation is that I believe that our teachers, our leaders, the overwhelming majority of them are showing up to work every day and doing everything that they can to educate our kids, and they're working so incredibly hard. And I like admire, love, and am inspired by our educators. And for us to get a different outcome, we need a different level of training and resources and support around our educators. And, for me, and maybe that's a systems level effort or initiative that isn't happening right now, or at least, is not a conversation I'm involved in yet. Um, but that's like, I don't think that we've had the confronting the brutal realities of our system was built for students to go into traditional jobs that have existed for a very long time. And now the job sector is changing at a rapid rate, and it's going to impact all sectors, right? Like I can imagine a universe where there's a jury of your peers is no longer human,
Mm.
right? Because what you rely on in humans is that they're able to interpret the law and the evidence. And it's like, well, are they the best at doing that?
Yeah.
And similarly, as we're making as lawyers are making arguments, like how are they feeding AI precedent? How are they like what's the best potential argument that comes out of this precedent based on the facts of the case? Like that is going to be a reality, I think.
Hmm.
And I think like that's an unsophisticated view of it. That's coming from someone who doesn't have a massive technology background. So I can't even imagine, what will actually be reality. And so like confronting that brutal fact of our system was built for a time that doesn't reflect the future, I think that needs to happen. And then we actually need to bring in the experts in the field to try to understand, like, okay, well, less of the content, but more of the skills and abilities. What do you need? And what, based on your understanding of our current day, what do you think the next 50 years are going to look like? So we can better set our kids up for that future.
And if you had to pick one skill that you think is most important for students to develop that can be cultivated at a young age, would it be math? Is that what you're saying? Or would it be another skill? If you had to pick one, it's a hard question.
It
Thank
is.
God we don't have to pick one. But if you had to pick one, what would it be?
I think I'd have to pick two.
Okay.
I think one is a huge sense of personal responsibility,
Mhm.
because the truth of it is like, and we don't really get this when we're kids, is like a day is going to come, whether it's when you're 18, you're 22, you're 25, you're 26, where it is all on you. And we need to prepare students for that moment earlier on, and give students more opportunities to understand that so that they can prepare themselves. Like understanding that the level of personal responsibility you're going to need to hold one day is one. And then I think two is I actually think it's being able to distill that which is complex into simple terms and being able to communicate them really clearly. So whether that is, an argument in an essay, your perception of a book, or a mathematical concept, I think that will be critical in the future. Being able to being able to speak in general terms that allows a lot of people to understand what you are saying. Those two things I think are going to be would be the what I would prioritize the most.
Yeah. That communication skill is so important. And I think even bringing that communication training into STEM is really something that could be helpful. I know when I was in high school, I had a really great experience being able to learn not at like desk, but everything was around like a boardroom table. They called it the Harkness table, and you would discuss things, whether it
Yeah.
was my way to this math solution is better than yours. Okay, fine. Like, let's talk about it and let's defend each other's points and let's realize, oh, maybe they had a better way. And you did the same thing in history class, right? And if you were not able to communicate why you thought something, then you weren't going to do very well, right? And I think at the end of the day, that's really important in life in general, when you're in the workplace, being able to communicate things in simple terms. And I think that gets lost a lot in STEM in general. The next question I want to ask you is, it's actually one of our closing questions, and you've shared so many great insights today. Just talking to you about like your thoughts on schools and your perspective. And one of the things that we brought home was really teachers aren't the problem, right? It's really the fact that they're so under-resourced. The system was created over 100 years ago and it hasn't changed. Tech is moving quickly. Like all of these things are happening. And so if you could give educators one piece of advice or schools one piece of advice in order to telling them to implement something, idea of that they can implement in order to better prepare students for the future, what would that be?
Mm.
And you could pick two if you needed to pick more than one, but
I'm trying to think about it from a more global perspective than
yeah.
just, what I'm doing in my day-to-day work. Okay, it's kind of one thing, but pseudo more complex than just
Hmm.
I think it is invest in teachers by clearly defining goals and excellence and supporting your teachers towards it. And potentially that like actually sounds very simple and easy. Which, largely is like set goals and align your resources to developing your teachers to achieving those goals. But it's very hard to do because in schools they are faced with there are so many challenges that come your way every day through compliance, through um, like staff absences, through resources available, through parents who are frustrated, and rightfully so, I would add, that at times it becomes difficult to keep your staff focused on a priority and to have the discipline to achieve. Because it's easy to chase everything and get nowhere. It's very hard to put your foot in the ground on something, and it feels very risky. It's like the adage or like the terminology I often use is like, and what I often see is schools are trying to place a bet on the roulette table on every single number there. And then we spin the wheel and they lose. But they're like, but at least I had a chip out on every number, as opposed to being like, I'm going to bet on these four and I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure that these hit. And that can seem scary and risky, but it's actually the pathway to perpetual betterment. Being able to identify what is most important, align your resources towards it, achieve it, and move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Having a focused goal, I think that's important just in general throughout any organization, but especially when it comes to schools. So I love that. Well, Antonio, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I really enjoyed speaking with you. As I said before, you're one of these people that have a lot of interesting perspectives when it comes to education, and part of that's fueled by the fact that you've been in so many different positions throughout the education system. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. It was so awesome. I really appreciated it. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening to that episode. I really enjoyed speaking with Antonio, and it's always great to speak with somebody that has so many different perspectives on education based on the various different roles that he has had. If you liked this episode, and which I'm sure you did if you made it all the way to the end, please make sure to subscribe to our podcast. It's on wherever you listen to your podcast. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure to subscribe to our channel, like it, give it 5 stars on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, and tell us who you'll like to hear on the podcast next, or any issues or topics that you want us to dive into. We really want to make sure this podcast is informative for all of our listeners too. So thank you so much for listening and have a great day.